All right, guys, it looks like we have most of everyone. There may be some people still coming in, but I think everyone now has been admitted. And I apologize again for the delay, especially to all of you who have been waiting so patiently and to our speakers today, because they are always very timely and very prepared. So I was trying to get the messages out. I don't know if everyone got my email about the delay, but we just had some technical. Zoom's been finicky the past week. So I apologize, but I think we're back ready to go. And we have most of our participants in, and I think it's time we get started. I'm really happy to introduce to you Crystal Baker and Mickey Valdez, who work with victims, with our victims in our office, and really lead the way in our office. And as I've told you before, we are a victim-centered office, so they are the heart and soul of everything that we do, and they are going to have an excellent presentation. So because we are late on time, I will say, you know, you are free to leave at 7:30 when we end, because I don't want to take more of your time. But if you can hang out a little bit more, because you know there'll be time for questions and things like that, and for them to kind of go over the rest of their presentation. I don't want them to have to rush through the information because it is important. If you could hang out a little later, we'd appreciate it. And I'm tell Crystal and Mickey, you know, go through it like normal. I know we're about 20 minutes in already, but don't rush through it because this is very important. So thank you very much for your time. And without further ado, Mickey and Crystal.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and pull up our presentation. Thank you, Tanya. Crystal's going to start us off, but if everyone could just do me a quick favor and make sure that your mics are muted for us so that everyone can hear the presentation. And then at the end, we'll be happy to take any of your questions. So
can't hear you, Mickey.
Volume went south for everyone, I think.
Yeah, it looked like she muted herself, maybe.
Nope, I muted her because I muted all. It was my fault. I'm just trying to unmute her.
There you go, Tanya.
Guys, I can't get it right today. I can't get it right. Mickey, is it working?
Hey, we all have those days, Tanya. You're all forgiven.
Thanks, guys. Sorry, Mickey. Let me see if I could go back to here. Mickey, I'm trying to.
You're muted, Mickey.
I'm gonna see if I could unmute her. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna unmute everybody. Let's see if it gives me that option.
I know that if you hit the space bar, it should unmute you anyway, unless she can override that.
Okay, let her try it. Try it again, Mickey.
My screen gave me an option to stay muted or unmute myself. I stayed muted.
Okay, now try it. No? Oh my God.
Is she
Oh my
muted
God.
on her end then? Did you unmute on your end?
I'm sure she's unmuting on her end and it's not working.
how's that?
There. Yeah.
Victory.
Ah! So sorry. Okay, now everyone mute. I'm not touching the mute all button.
All right, everybody, if everybody could mute, except for Crystal and I, we'll do our best to try to get through this. Sorry. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen, and then we will do our best to answer everybody's questions at the end. Give me 1 second. Let's see. Tanya, you're going to have to give me the ability to share my screen.
1 minute. We're working here. It says all participants can share. It won't let me touch that. I just gave multiple participants can share
Here we
simultaneously.
go. I got it.
Okay, good.
How are we doing? Can everybody see it?
Yep.
All right, now we can go. So sorry, Crystal.
That's all right. So I'm Crystal Baker. I'm our director of our Victim Services Division within the Summit County Prosecutor's Office. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our division. Unfortunately, I won't be able to be on here for very long because I have another obligation. So I probably will pass it over to Mickey, and she will kind of finish it up. And I'm available if anybody wants to email me with any questions or anything that they're that the presentation doesn't give enough information for, because I'm not going to be here for very long. I'm sorry about that. So before Prosecutor Walsh took office, one of her main priorities was to create a division that was dedicated to victims of crime. So prior to 2001, there was not a dedicated unit for victims of crime. And so that was one of her first priorities, and she created the unit. And the purpose of the unit is for all victims of crime, whether it's in the common pleas courts or the juvenile delinquency division, to have a victim advocate there with them to provide support, to be by their side as they go through the criminal and juvenile justice system. Can anyone hear that? Because I can't hear it.
No.
No.
class,
Nope.
eyes showed horror, and she said,
Now I hear something.
Give me 1 second.
Nana, what's happened to you?
Good?
And I said, I've been raped. I've been raped.
Yes, that works.
A guy at the church, and he wanted to be my friend, and instead he assaulted me, and I felt very scared.
There is behind every case that involves a crime of violence a very real human being who has needs and needs to be spoken to and needs to have the system explained to them.
The Office for Victims of Crime was created in 1984 to enhance victims' rights and services for all victims across the United States.
The Office for Victims of Crime is a federal agency created by Congress that is a part of the Department of Justice.
It is the government funding agency for crime victims compensation programs and victim assistance programs.
The Crime Victims Fund is distributed in a number of ways by the Office for Victims of Crime. Part of it goes to support other federal agencies who are providing services for victims. Part of it goes to support model programs and practices, but the majority of the funding goes to the states.
The Office for Victims of Crime is not the provider of services, but they fund states, and then states can subgrant the money out to direct service providers. Each jurisdiction, each state is going to be different, and by distributing the money to the states, they determine where the greatest need is and what the need is.
Victim service providers need very specialized programs to reach hard-to-find victims who are not always assured that they are going to find welcoming and accessible services when they do reach out for help.
The Office for Victims of Crime is very committed to the professionalization of the crime victim services field. We do that through developing new programs, through training and technical assistance, and disseminating information about model programs that benefit victims of crime.
There's an intentional effort to get everyone together so we know how to share resources, we know how to work together.
The Office for Victims of Crime listens to the needs of state administrators for victims' compensation and assistance, and then gives us the tools we need to provide assistance to victims of crime.
So I wanted to show that because the Office of Victims of Crime, we are recipients of funding through the Office of Victims of Crime, and a lot of the funding that we have gets funneled down from the federal government into the state, and then we are using that funding to be able to provide the victim services that we provide. So in 2021, we provided 3,042 victims with services, and that includes through our criminal division and our juvenile delinquency division. And you'll see here, these are some of the main things that we do: informing victims of their rights, making sure that every step of the way they know what's going on with the case and that they are included in the process, and that we are advocating on their behalf. And we're doing that throughout the court case, but then we're also doing that after the conviction. So one of the things that we do is work with survivors after the case has gone through the system, and now maybe that particular offender is trying to get out of prison early, or they're up for parole. We're providing support and advocacy through that process as well. And Mickey, I'm going to have to turn it over to you for the next several slides.
Okay.
Sorry about how short it was that I was here. Thank you everybody for being patient with us. And you'll see my info at the end of the slides. If you want to reach out to me, please feel free to do that.
All right. Thanks, Crystal. So some of the reactions to the justice system that we see is, you know, the reason that we have these victim services within our division, you know, it's difficult for victims of crime because they're having to face the defendant in the courtroom. You know, it requires these victims to be reminded of the crime. They have to relive it. They have to revisit some of the details of the crime. And of course, there's the fear of the unknown, meaning they don't know what's going to happen at the end of the case. They don't know if the judge or the jury will find them guilty or not. And even if they do find them guilty, there's no guarantee as to what the sentence will be or for how long. And that can result in, because they don't know what's going to happen or how they will respond to that, a lot of times they would rather just avoid it. So they won't respond to the prosecutor's phone calls or letters. They don't show up to the court. They'll cancel appointments. So having victim advocates in place to help as a support system, get them through the court process so that they understand it better and they have someone that they can turn to answer questions and to reach out to them, even when there's nothing to report on the case itself, just to check in to see how they're doing. Do they have anything that they're concerned about? Are there any needs at this time that the victims are concerned about that can be addressed either by connecting them to additional resources or something that needs to be brought up by the prosecutor to the court? So things like that are important as well. So court advocacy, what exactly is that? It's providing victims of crime with specifically education about the court system. A lot of times victims come into our courtrooms and they don't understand the court process. They don't understand the criminal justice system. Many people in our community, because they've never been the victim of a crime or involved in the criminal justice process, they don't understand all of the different nuances. How does a case get started? What happens next? What does it mean? What does grand jury mean? They don't know what happens and why things happen. So having advocates help the victims and the survivors actually understand the process and how to navigate it is what court advocacy is all about. So we educate those victims about what their rights are as a victim, and educating them about the legal and judicial process along the way, guiding them through it, and what their options are, making sure that they have support, and making sure that they have resources, and know what their options are, and supporting their decisions as they have options provided to them throughout the process. A victim advocate, I've used that term a couple of times now. So according to the Ohio Revised Code, a victim advocate is a person from a crime victim service like ourselves, who provides support and assistance for a victim of crime during court proceedings and recovery efforts related to the crime. Now we have several different types of victim advocates in Summit County. In our office, we have victim advocates who are court advocates, and they are specifically working with advocates in the court. We also have, within Summit County, we have community-based advocates who can work with advocates in the court, but they also are working with them doing other type of advocacy that is outside the realm of what our advocates do. So they might help them with a civil protection order. They might help them with getting into a shelter. They might help them with getting connection to, additional food from a food pantry and things like that. So there are other types of advocacy, victim advocacy, but in our office, we are specifically doing court advocacy. Marsy's Law is something that was recently passed that was based out of a crime that occurred where an offender was released from jail, and the offender was, the parents of the victim was not notified that he was released from jail, and they actually ran into him at the grocery store. And because of that, this whole movement took place. It has recently been passed in the state of Ohio. And because of that, now victims have a constitutional right to be informed at all levels of the court process. When an offender is released from prison, is up for judicial release, is transferred from one prison to another. And there are multiple things. There is a video that Crystal has shared in this presentation that I will go ahead and play because it goes through a great explanation of what Marsy's Law is.
With liberty and justice for all. Justice for all. That's the way things should be. But Ohio's judicial system is not balanced if you're a crime victim. Crime victims should be treated with respect and have their rights guaranteed. That's why we need Issue 1, Marsy's Law.
Marsy's Law gives crime victims equal rights, like the right to be notified of court proceedings and be heard during every step of the judicial process. Issue 1, Marsy's Law, restores the balance, so there's justice for all. With liberty and justice for all.
Sorry about that. My mouse was in the wrong place.
National Crime Victims' Rights theme this year is strength, resilience, and justice. I've been a victim advocate now for about 29 years and started out by advocating for myself. I grew up in a violent, sexually abusive home from the time I was 5 to 15.
I know in my case alone, my abuser was someone that I knew, and I knew what they were capable of. And for me to say I need to be protected is something they should have listened to.
Being a survivor of sexual abuse that started at the time that I was 8, and over a 2-year time period, I was failed on multiple occasions. Once I was able to feel like I was in a safe space to come forward.
My abuser was out of jail and I had not been notified, and showed up at a gas station where I was threatening me.
What Marcy's Law means is that we're trying to do for the victim of a crime the same thing that we in our Constitution do for a defendant or a person charged with a crime, and that is to have victims equal with the defendant in the courtroom, having an ability to be represented, to enforce their rights, to be present, to have notice of hearings, to receive information from prosecutors, from police agencies, and have a right, if those rights are violated, a mechanism to enforce them apart from what the prosecutor may do to enforce those rights.
I feel like Marcy's Law will give it some teeth to say, you know, the victim's rights should be as recognized as the defendant's rights.
I believe Marcy's Law is definitely trying to offer dignity and respect to victims.
I know what it's like, and it's been my life's goal to ensure that no one would go through what I went through. And all of the wonderful, beautiful souls that I've worked with over the past 16 years. And it breaks my heart when I see how hard they suffer. And the Marcy's Law Amendment will stop that suffering.
So in Summit County, in response to crime victims here in our office, we have not just our victim services division here in the prosecutor's office, but the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections also has an Office of Victim Services. There is Victim Assistance Program that is here in Summit County. There's the Rape Crisis Center, Better Women's Shelter, which the two of them operate under Hope and Healing. And there's also the PATH Center, which is located in Akron General, Cleveland Clinic, Akron General. This is some of the feedback that we've received from victims that we've worked with in our office. Some of the things that we hear from the survivors that makes us understand just how important the Victim Services Division is to helping crime victims navigate the system, and knowing that they've got some support in navigating the system. We know that it's difficult, especially at this time, in going through probably what's some of the most difficult time in their life, but having someone to help answer questions, help guide them through, and provide them with some resources when necessary, and just let them know that their reactions and their responses are normal, and they have someone that they can lean on during this time. It goes a long way. So we know that it's a valuable service, and we're very grateful that Prosecutor Walsh sees the value in that, and we know that our community is better because of it. So one of the things that has grown out of the Victim Services Division is extends into this campaign that Prosecutor Walsh launched back in 2019. It's the Start by Believing campaign that specifically reaches out to our community to improve the way that we respond to victims of sexual assault. We all know that victims of sexual assault are usually treated very differently
than victims of other types of crime. And so because of that, Prosecutor Walsh, like other, not just prosecutors, but other organizations and agencies across the country and even across the world, are starting to push this movement of Start by Believing to improve the way that we respond. So Start by Believing is a public awareness campaign. It was started back in 2011 by End Violence Against Women International. And last year we celebrated the 10-year anniversary, and our office was lucky enough to be recognized by EVAWI as one of their spotlight organizations who have a Start by Believing campaign based on the collaborative nature of our campaign and how many agencies that we have worked with within our community to grow the campaign, to work together with other agencies like the Summit County Sheriff's Office, Victim Assistance Program, Battered Women's Shelter, Rape Crisis Center, and PATH Center, and many other agencies, other police departments, the Akron Police Department, to work together to keep pushing the Start by Believing campaign here in Summit County, that they spotlighted the Summit County Prosecutor's Office in their annual campaign and their annual Start by Believing Day back in April of 2021. So we were very proud of that. But ultimately, it is to improve the way our society responds to sexual assault survivors, so that we can make sure investigations are done fairly, they're done thoroughly, and they're done without judgment. So when Prosecutor Walsh first learned of this whole public awareness campaign, she knew that it was exactly in line with everything that she's done since she was first elected into office, and wanted to bring that to our community to make sure that we're doing everything we can here in Summit County to do the same. So in 2019, she launched our campaign. There are four main reasons that I want to talk about why it's important. And the first is that sexual assault is more common than people actually realize. The statistics show us that 1 in 6 women and about 1 to 3% of men, adult men in the United States, will experience sexual assault in their lifetime. And that's much higher than people realize. It is far more common than I think the average person either realizes or chooses to see. The second reason is that most victims of sexual assault are doubted or blamed. And I say that hesitantly because we may not realize that that's actually what we're doing when someone, discloses that something like this may have happened to them. And it comes in the form of questions. When someone discloses that sexual assault may have occurred or has occurred to them, the first thing that many people do is respond with a question instead of, "I'm so sorry this happened to you." Think about that for a second. So these types of negative responses, they have a negative effect on the person who's reporting or the person who has disclosed to their family or their friend, whoever it is. And it makes it less likely that they're going to go to the police officer. So think about it. If you go to your best friend and you tell them that this has happened to you, and they go, "Well, why did you go home with him? Or why did you stay with her?" Do you think you'd be more likely to go to the police and tell them that this has just happened to you? Probably not. So a negative response from someone that you trust, a family member or a friend, is going to decrease the likelihood that you're going to go to the police officers or to the hospital and report this to a formal service provider. So unfortunately, statistics and all of the research show us that only about 5 to 20% of sexual assaults are reported to the police. That means that sexual assaults are the most underreported crime in our entire country. That's that's a percentage that I want you guys to remember because it's going to be significant later on. Another reason it's important is because those negative responses from our friends and family lead to not reporting to the police or to the hospital, which then means that there's no investigation, and that means that there's potentially more victims. I'm not saying that every single perpetrator will absolutely, without question, without fail, perpetrate again. But there is research that does show that many rapists who are not caught, who are not held accountable, will go on to attack again. And on average, it's 6 times, which means there are 5 additional victims who could potentially be a victim if there is one failed response. So if one person feels uncomfortable, unsupported to go forward to report that they've been sexually assaulted, that means that your sister, your daughter, your son, your nephew could be a victim potentially. And because of this trickle down effect, that means that only about 2% of perpetrators of sexual assault will ever spend a day in jail. There are other factors that go into that, but that is what we look at. And the last reason that it's important for us to pay attention to this and for us to do something about it is because it's costly, not just for survivors, but it is costly to our society. The CDC did a study where they tried to put a value, a monetary value, on how costly sexual assault is. And they looked at all of the costs that a survivor of sexual assault who was a victim when they were younger, and all of the costs that they incurred from the time that they were assaulted to the older point in their life, and all of those who were recently assaulted and all the anticipated costs that they would incur in their lifetime. And they, averaged it all out, and they came to this number of $122,461 per victim. And we know that there are 25 million reported victims of rape in the United States. And remember, I told you that there are only 5 to 20% that are reported. So that number is actually much, much higher if we factor in those that are not reported. But we're just going to stick with the 25 that we know of. That comes out to $3.1 trillion in lifetime costs. So these costs are broken down into 3 categories. 1.2 trillion in medical costs. That's the x-rays, that's any medical procedures, sutures, whatever it is, and medications, even mental health costs, therapy, what have you, that goes into treating a survivor. $1.6 trillion in lost work productivity. All the days missed to go meet with the police, meet with the prosecutor, testify at court, go to the sentencing hearing. But it also includes all those days that a survivor can't pull themselves out of bed because it's just too hard. Or all the days that they do pull themselves out of bed, but they're not quite as productive as they used to be, or they're not quite as efficient at their job because they're triggered very easily. And then the smallest percentage, or the smallest amount of money, is only $234 billion in criminal justice costs. It's quite costly to our society, but also to the victims and the survivors of sexual assault. So it's important for us to pay attention. It's important for us to make a difference. It's important for us to make that change. So where do we start? We have to start somewhere, and the first thing is to educate ourselves on what rape truly is. Many times, if we were to ask the average person on the street what the definition of rape is, they wouldn't know the exact definition. So we're going to start here. Rape, according to the Ohio Revised Code, is any form of unwanted sexual contact obtained without consent or obtained through the use of force, threat of force, intimidation, or coercion. And that includes engaging in any type of sexual conduct with someone who is unable to give consent. So that means somebody who is unconscious or incapacitated either through the use of drugs or alcohol, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, someone who's disabled either physically or mentally, and anyone under the age of 13. That is the definition of rape according to the Ohio Revised Code. There are some differences from state to state, but generally they are very similar to this. But if you were to ask the average person, they might have something different to say. Just in general, they might describe it as rape is, you know, a stranger who it happens at night, right? Jumps out of the bushes, it's got a weapon, and it's violent. And it's usually a woman who's the victim, and she's hysterical and she's fighting him off. And as soon as she's able to get away, she goes straight to the police and she's hysterical and she's crying and she reports exactly what happens, right? Something that looks like this. The fact of the matter is, it looks nothing like this most of the time. I gave this presentation to 100 different police officers in the room at one time. And when I asked them, how many of you have taken a report, how many reports of sexual assault have you taken that look like this? And they said like 0 to 25% of their cases look like that. I actually had one police officer tell me that in 30 years of doing it, he never had one case that looked like that, not one in 30 years. It's because it doesn't look like that. But unfortunately, we're conditioned to believe that that's what rape looks like because that's what our society believes. That's what we've been conditioned to believe. We carry an implicit bias based on things that we've developed over time from the time we were born. It's a processing, a stereotype, both negative and positive, where we kind of put things into categories, right? It's a learned thing from the time we're born based on the people that we're around. So the things we learn from our family and our friends and the kids we go to school with and our
age of consent in the state of Ohio.
Hello?
Here's what I found.
Hi.
I'm muting people. You can keep going.
Oh, okay.
We'll
Sorry, I
answer
thought
questions.
question.
We'll answer questions at the end and be happy to answer any and all questions.
Thank you. So implicit bias is something that is learned from the time we're very young, and it develops over time based on the things that we hear and see and learn from our family and our friends and our coworkers and the kids we grow up with and the things we see on TV and the music we listen to and the movies we watch. And it's ingrained in us, and it becomes deeper and deeper ingrained as we get older. And it's not something that we can just turn off. We can't make it go away. So I'm not telling you that you can just turn off your implicit bias. We all have it. Every single one of us has it. But I'm telling you this so that you can be aware that you have an implicit bias already. We all do. So that if we recognize that we all carry our own biases, we can be more in tune to it, and we can slow our processes down and be more open to hearing other factors before we make our judgments. That's all. So we're going to test how our own implicit biases work by doing a little hypothetical study. I'm going to give you a made-up case. It's not something I pulled out of some old case files. It's completely made up, but these are the case facts. So we have a woman who's sexually assaulted by a male supervisor at a convenience store that she works at. He asks her to stay late to help stock the shelves, but she says she can't because she uses public transportation and it doesn't run that late. So he offers to give her a ride home. So she reluctantly agrees to stay late and accepts his offer to take her home. Later, she reports that he raped her in the car after he drove her to an isolated area. So these are the facts of the case, and they're not going to change. but we're going to look at two different scenarios or two different descriptions of a victim and a suspect to see how our own implicit bias works. And this is the only time I'm going to ask you to provide me with your thoughts. So Tanya, if you could allow them to unmute here, I'm going to ask them to provide their thoughts. So in our first scenario, our victim is a college student from a rural community. She lives farther away from the college because it's cheaper to live in that housing. She has to work as much as possible to pay for her tuition and pay for all of her living expenses. She's a good student and she has no criminal history. How do you think a jury would see this victim?
They would view her as a victim.
They would view her as a victim. What else? Do you think they would believe her?
Yes.
Yes.
They may believe her.
Yes.
I think that they would think that the victimizer was premeditated.
Okay.
But I would even know his background too, though, before I.
All right, well, let's get to his background. The suspect has a criminal history, including drug possession and petty theft. His name comes up and associated with a domestic violence report, but he's never been charged. And he's only been employed at the store for less than a year. So how would the jury look at him?
Not so good.
Guilty.
Guilty, yeah.
All right, so
They're gonna look at him as guilty, but that does not mean that he's innocent or that he is guilty. It could go either way.
True.
In the domestic violence situation, it could be that no charges were pressed or whoever he was assaulting didn't report it.
right. So here's the thing that I'm glad that you guys are bringing up additional things here. That's the key, is that implicit bias is that initial response. You know, when you first look at that victim, you say, oh, she's innocent. She's naive. She didn't know better. She's a perfectly innocent victim, right?
I'm
You look at
sorry,
the test-
correction. That wasn't my, I mean, me personally, I'm still questioning her just because I'm always questioning people. But I
That's
mean,
okay.
ideally, I think she would be considered innocent and the victim. But I know there's always that.
In the grand scheme, I gotta agree that like I have a feeling that like the victim might not be the victim in this scenario. Just saying.
Okay, so I'm gonna hit pause on this for a second, okay? I'm gonna hit pause. And I love everything that you're saying. And the reason why I love exactly what you're saying is because each one of you has a different experience. Each one of you has a different reason for why you feel the way you do. And that's exactly my point.
Amen.
Okay, so let's get to our second scenario, okay? Here's the second one. This victim is in her mid-40s and had her kids taken away for neglect. The victim has a criminal history, including check fraud. She needs an income to pay off her fine. She's got to prove she's working. She's not using drugs or alcohol, and that's the only way that she's going to get custody of her kids back. Now, remember, the facts of that case have not changed. It is exactly the same. How is a
But
jury
was
to look at her?
Was the kids really taken away for neglect, or was that the magistrate's decision? You
No,
gotta
no,
look at all
no, no,
aspects.
no. Think about the facts of the case. I'm not asking about her kids being taken away. I'm talking about the rape.
Does that have
Think
to do
about
with
the
her rape?
rape. How is the jury going to look
It
at
has
this
it has
victim?
a huge impact because I've had my kids taken from me and I didn't even do anything, but because the magistrate made that decision, it's impacted a lot of my life. So it really has. It really does have a big impact.
No, no, no. I'm asking, is the jury going to believe this woman was raped?
Okay, what I'm seeing here is somebody that probably lives in a lower income area because of the types of things I'm seeing here. That's an assumption on my part, but that would automatically put a bias, I think, in a lot of people's minds.
Agreed.
Okay.
But in a whole situation, her criminal background, the drug usage, it still doesn't give somebody the right to rape her. So you've got to kind of wipe all of that out and look at the situation.
That's true. That's true. But our implicit bias, when you look at these two victims side by side, the credibility of a jury is going to look at just snap judgment.
I'm not talking about, yeah,
Unfortunately,
but we have to weigh we have to weigh this and that. I'm talking about snap judgment.
Are they allowed to
It
bring
will-
this stuff up in court?
I'm sorry?
Are they allowed to bring this stuff up in court?
Well, that's a question for your prosecutor. I'm just talking about the way that.
Are you talking, Mickey, about the way society would normally look at things?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And they're definitely going to believe number one over number two, I would assume.
That's my point.
In our society, yes.
No, I don't think they're allowed to bring up the victims.
Well, it's all on the rules of evidence and how it gets argued in the court. So yes, it's kind of like what I was talking about with Nathan. Like there are rules, but there are exceptions to the rules. So there are moments where the evidence can be brought up depending on different circumstances, and those would be argued between the lawyers and decided by the judges. But generally speaking, the past history of an individual cannot be brought up, but it kind of depends on the situation where it could be brought up. So sorry, I'm going to give you the lawyer answer and say it depends.
Right. the other thing I want you guys to keep in mind too, the other thing I want you guys to keep in mind is that, let's say this isn't even in the court. Let's just say it's not even in the court. This is before it gets to the court. This is at the police station. This is in your neighborhood.
And I just to interject, I agree that it's about the credibility if we're being realistic here. I mean, if I was a lawyer and I'm looking at a case and you had check fraud, to me, that's a dishonesty issue. And it would raise my hairs. Like, okay, like my antenna, like now I gotta do extra probing because now I don't really believe you. So yeah.
But was the check fraud because she was forced into it based on a domestic violence situation?
I feel like that everybody has a choice, and that for me, I've been in domestic violence situation. I didn't do check fraud.
So I mean, there are a lot of questions that go, that we can go down a whole bunch of rabbit holes, but I think that you guys raise a lot of really good points. But I want you guys to keep in mind that it's very easy for people to look at victim number one versus victim number two and say, well, yeah, I believe victim number one. I have a really hard time believing victim number two. And that's just across the board in our society. Okay, but we didn't even look at suspect number two. Let's look at suspect number two.
I have a question.
Hang on one second. Suspect number two is the store manager, and he's been employee of the month several times. He's been working at the store for over 3 years. He's married, he's got 3 kids, and he's an active member of his church. How many people are not going to believe that it's even possible? Why would he even do something like that? Why would she accuse him?
Because he's more likely.
How many people in this community would say that to themselves, though?
It depends on the community.
It would be some that would say it, but
think about all of the cases that have been in the news. Don't deny it because it's been in the news. How many times?
I think it depends on A, race. I think it depends on B, your own personal history. And what have you experienced?
I'm gonna go with depends on race. Point blank. That's what it depends on.
Unfortunately, and you know what? And I'm white, and I'm telling you right now, unfortunately, it depends on race, and I don't mean it in a negative way. And it sucks because I have black friends and white friends, but people are so judgmental over a race, and it's bullcrap in this community, in this area, in this generation. You shouldn't have to judge. You should not have to validate or describe or explain why you're friends with somebody just because they're another race or another religion or not. Who you're friends with is who you're friends with, whether it shouldn't matter.
Okay, now I do have 2 people who have raised their hand to help answer that question. And I'm only going to go to them because they've raised their hand quietly and patiently.
You're fine. Go ahead.
We're trying not to interrupt with questions, but this is, a participating point in the slide. So Thomas, would you like to go? I see your hand is raised.
Sure. As I understand, this has just been a really interesting, vigorous conversation, and it really goes to the point, as I understand implicit bias anyway, that it is largely individual, I mean, it's entirely individual, and it's based on our own experiences. And it's also one of the important pieces of it is that we may not be aware of it. That's why it's considered implicit, is that it's part of our own makeup. Value judgments aside, we all have them to some degree with regard to any number of things. Could be, it could be height, it could be weight, it could be color of hair, it could be color of skin, it could be, really anything. It could be educational attainment, it could be economic status, you name it. We all have some type of bias. And I think really
profession.
the profession, it could be any number of reasons why we have that snap judgment that is likely not valid, but it plays a part in our decision making, in our value judgments of others. But I guess the point is that the way to intervene with that is to understand that we have it, to explore it, to possibly understand it, and then to remove it as one of those things that we, those lenses that we look through.
Exactly.
But we all have them. And so
Correct.
that's why I think this conversation has been so vigorous, is because everybody we're coming at it from our own past experiences and saying, well, this is what I would see, or this is what I would see. But the reality is, 200,000 people in the city will see 200,000 different things. So
Right.
there we go.
So basically, no one is wrong.
Correct.
Right. Everyone is saying, I would say that this is the way it is. It's not incorrect. So thank you, Thomas. That was absolutely right.
And then we have one other question from Joyce. And then I think after this, we'll let her Mickey get through the presentation, and put your questions in the chat or wait to the end, because Mickey is going to stay to answer all of your questions. I promise.
Yes.
We love the conversation and the questions. So Joyce, go ahead.
Not a question, just a comment. This, the bias, implicit bias, kind of like what Mr. Thomas just said. When you think about occupations, as I was reading these and listening, the first occupation that came to mind is prostitutes. They are not often believed, and many of them will not come forward when they've been raped because of the different attitudes and I would imagine the type of work that they do. They feel that they're not going to be believed, or that they deserved it.
Yes, ma'am. That's exactly right. And because you brought that up, Tanya, if you can go ahead and mute everybody, I'm going to give one anecdote just to tag on to what Joyce's comment was. You're exactly right in what you say, Joyce. And to prove that, I'll use one of the ASAKI cases. And ASAKI stands for Akron Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, which is part of the specialized unit that I work in, where we are investigating and prosecuting the cold case sexual assaults in in Akron. And we last year, I'm sorry, trying to remember, everything has been running together because of the pandemic, but just recently tried and convicted Prentice Smith. I don't know if you heard it in the news. He was sentenced to 88 years in prison for kidnapping and raping 4 women. He was attached to 4 different DNA kits. 3 of the women who were his victims had histories of being sex workers. And those 3 women,
come here.
Those 3 women were not believed.
Get up here.
When
Get
they
up here. Come here. Come here.
Tanya, can you mute? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm doing my best. There's one I can't mute, but I'm doing my best. If everyone can
That's
mute
okay.
themselves.
So yes, you're absolutely right. Part of the reason that we were able to get this conviction against Mr. Smith is because we brought all 4 of them together in the case. All 4 cases were brought together in the trial. I do believe that had the 4 cases been separated and tried individually, I'm not sure that we would have been able to get convictions in all 4.
Even though we had DNA, again, 3 of 4 had histories of prostitution, and it's harder for our society to believe. Many people in our society believe that that's your chosen profession. That's the risk you run. But with the facts of the case and the details that came out at trial, the jurors were moved to the point that at the end of the trial, when we walked into the jury room, they stood up and applauded for the prosecutors. I was moved by that. In that regard, if you have questions about that afterwards, I'd be happy to share. But anyway, we'll move on. So one of the myths that our society, there's 4 myths that we'll talk about. One of the reasons why it's hard for our society to be supportive of victims of sexual assault, and why we often doubt victims of sexual assault, is because our society is hanging on to these myths that have pervaded for decades. And one of them is that rape is most commonly perpetrated by a stranger or by someone unknown to the victim. And that is not true. The truth is that 85% of crimes are perpetrated by someone known to the victim. They know their perpetrator. It is a family member. It is a friend. It is an acquaintance. It's a coworker. It's their coach. It's the team doctor, like Dr. Nasser for the gymnastics coach, right? It's their priest, like the Catholic priests, and I'm Catholic, right? It's it's their supervisor at work. It's somebody that they know. It's much harder to come forward when it's somebody that you know, right? Don't you think that's that 14%? It falls right in that 5 to 20% range, right? Remember we talked about 5 to 20% are reported to law enforcement. Only 14% are stranger rapes. That's when it's easiest to report to law enforcement, is when it's a stranger. Why? Because it's less likely that you will be doubted by law enforcement or by your friend or your family member, because you're seen as an innocent victim. That's the difference. Tanya, I think we have someone that is joined our Zoom here.
Oh.
That's drawing on our, I don't know.
Please.
So we're just gonna keep moving though.
Yeah. I
So
noticed
this-
it on the red and I thought it was something else, but
Yeah, I think that might be it too. So myth number 2 is that a real rape has a lot of physical violence and shows visible injury. And that's not true either. Actually, it's the exact opposite. And if you take myth number 1 and myth number 2, it makes sense. If you know your perpetrator, and if the person that is perpetrating against you is somebody that you know, somebody that you probably trust, they don't need to be physically violent, right? All they need to do is coerce you or, intimidate you, use fear. That's really all they need. They need to manipulate you. That's all it takes, right? Don't tell your mom. Otherwise, you'll probably be grounded. If you say anything, I'll make sure that you don't get that promotion. These are the types of tactics that are easy to get victims to not come forward. And then when they do, when they finally feel like this isn't right, I should come forward, then people are saying, well, why did you wait so long? Now, I hate to bring this up, but I'm going to anyway, because I always get a huge conversation going, but I'm going to do it anyway. Think about the Deshaun Watson case, right? We're not going to get into specifics, but let's just use that, right? We've got however many women, 20 some women that have come forward. And this is not, they're not even claiming rape. They're claiming sexual misconduct. Okay. 22 women have come forward and said that he has done something inappropriate. They've all come forward, and every single person on the planet just about is saying, well, why'd you wait so long? It's clearly got to be monetarily motivated, right? Well, how do we know that they haven't come forward before? We have no idea that they didn't go to their friend or their family and said, but if you come forward, that means that you're not going to keep getting that money, right? Or maybe they did go to their boss and their boss said, no, you're going to keep doing this because we need this client. Or maybe they did go to the police and they wrote the report and nothing happened. Who knows? We have no idea what happened. Just because we didn't hear about it doesn't mean that they didn't come forward. That's all I'm saying, is that many people say that if they didn't come forward right away, then it means that they must be lying. Or if they didn't come forward right away, then they're exaggerating. That's not the case, especially when 85% of the time they know their perpetrator. And 85% of the time it's manipulation and coercion and fraud or fear that they're using to do this to their victim. Many of the victims who were victims of Larry Nassar didn't come forward right away. And when they did come forward, nothing was done. It continued to happen over and over and over. So they didn't push it. So because they thought that maybe nothing was wrong. And the same thing can be said about many other victims of many other perpetrators. It's not as black and white as people think. Moving on. Sorry. Myth number 3. Victims of a real rape would report the crime to the police immediately and react hysterically. Again, as I was saying, it's not always that simple. They aren't always going to come forward right away. Now, going to a different scenario, let's just say it's not the same scenario that we just discussed. Let's say, let's take Brock Turner. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with Brock Turner. That's the Stanford student who raped a girl who was inebriated, like passed out drunk at a party, raped her behind a dumpster, and 2 other students who were on bikes passed by and actually caught him in the act. And it's the only reason that he was caught, because she was so passed out she didn't even know what was happening to her. She didn't even know who it was or who he was. So that's why he was caught. She would have never known. So if a victim doesn't come forward to report, maybe because they don't know exactly what happened or by whom. So if they do go to the police and the police say, so tell me what happened. I'm not really sure what happened, but I think something happened. Okay, well, can you describe the person for me? No, I don't know what they look like. Okay, well, nothing for us to do here. What are they going to say? And how are they going to feel? They're going to go right back home, and there's no reason for them to go to the police. That's why they feel the way they feel. So to expect a victim automatically to go to the police and report and be hysterical, it's not realistic, not in every instance. These are the things that we need to open our society's mind to understand that it is not always black and white. The trauma, even when they are aware, when they do have their faculties about them, if they're not drunk or under the influence of some recreational drug, or whether it's voluntary or involuntary, even if they are aware, they may be so traumatized that they aren't able to come forward. Maybe they're too scared. Maybe they don't have a support system in place for them to feel like they can come forward. What we need to do is create a society or an environment where they do feel supported, that when they do come forward, that they won't be treated like they've done something to result in that. The last myth is that the victim would not have been sexually assaulted if they hadn't made a particular choice, engaged in a particular activity, or acted in a particular way. And that's what we do as a society. We tell them that if you hadn't gone to the bar alone, or if you hadn't had so much to drink, or if you hadn't gotten into the car with that person, or if your skirt hadn't been so short, or your blouse hadn't been cut so low, you wouldn't have been sexually assaulted. And that's not the case. But then on the other hand, we also tell boys who are manipulated by older women and forced into a sexual relationship that they shouldn't be in, that high five, good for you, that's not okay either, right? There is no particular activity, choice, or behavior where sexual assault is the natural consequence. Going to the bar alone, getting too drunk, walking down a dark street, or to the car parked in the parking deck by yourself at night, those are not choices or activities where the natural consequence is being sexually assaulted. Drinking too much, the natural consequence is a hangover. So we're going to take a look at a video here that is a little bit lighthearted. It's a spoof on if we were to treat any other type of crime the way we treat a victim of sexual assault. That's not to say, I'm not bashing the police here, and I'm not saying that our police officers treat victims of sexual assault this way, because they don't. They are pretty good about it. They've gone through a lot of training over the years and have definitely improved their skills. So, but this is a little lighthearted way at looking at it, just to see how ridiculous it is.
You guys want some water or tea?
They seem pretty upbeat for somebody who just had their computer stolen.
Well, I've just never been robbed before. I'm just trying to be polite.
Are you sure it wasn't an unfortunate yard sale?
Yeah, it was a brand new iMac with Retina display.
Ooh, sounds pretty sexy. We flaunting it?
No, it was right over there on the bureau.
Oh, right here in front of this window. Flashing your goods for all the world to see? Kind of sounds like you were asking for it.
I should be able to put my computer wherever I want.
By filing a report, you're going to bring a lot of negative attention to this neighborhood and to yourself.
I don't care. It's not my fault that this happened. The perpetrator should be the one getting the negative attention.
Whoa. Are you yelling at us? Because that is exactly the kind of bad behavior that we can use against you in your report.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not yelling. Please investigate.
Sure. Let's take a look around. No signs of forced entry.
Nope.
Locks intact.
Yep.
No broken windows. Do you have any physical evidence that you were robbed?
Yes. I had a computer, and now I don't have a computer.
Oh, let's not get cute, okay? How do I know that you didn't want someone to take your computer?
Because I'm saying I didn't.
Had you been drinking?
I had a Bloody Mary at brunch, but I don't see why that matters.
Wow. Because if you were drinking, the courts are probably going to side with the robber.
That doesn't make any sense. Even if I was blackout drunk, I still have the right to a safe home.
I think we're done here.
Wait, what?
Well, we need physical evidence in order to prove that you were robbed, and so far, we don't have any.
Well, what about dusting for fingerprints?
We could test for fingerprints.
Great, yeah, let's do that.
But there is a backlog of 400,000 fingerprint kits that have yet to be processed, so it's going to be a while.
This is ridiculous.
And even if we did find the perp at this point, it would be a real he said thing.
What?
Yeah, so you ready to drop this thing?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. Someone was in here without my consent, and they took something that I'll never get back. I feel violated. And by not doing something about it, you're letting them go free so we could do it to other people.
Look, we can tell you're upset. So we're going to file a report. Don't worry. If I was you, I'd maybe get an alarm system, some security cameras, keep your blinds closed, hide all your valuables.
Buy yourself a gun, take some self-defense classes, make sure you get a big dog, make sure the house is never alone.
God, this whole system is set up against the victims.
Hey, robbers will be robbers. I'd like that tea now.
No, there's no tea here.
Oh, water
no
would
tea.
All right, so I have 4 simple steps that you can do both in your professional life and at home to help us improve
our community and, help create an environment that's more conducive to making victims of sexual assault feel more supported and improve that environment. So first is recognizing that they're gonna seek help and support from their friends and family members first, and know that that first response, your response, and the response from their family and friends is the most important response. And when they come to you, that is definitely going to be, it's going to impact whether or not they choose to go forward and report to a service provider, a formal service provider like law enforcement or a medical provider. And the studies show that victims who come forward that first time and report to somebody that they're closest to, who meet them with support and belief, actually have a better recovery process. They show fewer symptoms of PTSD, and they feel more supported, and their healing process is much easier. So that's better all the way around. The second thing is just to react positively and from a place of non-judgment. They came to you for a reason. Obviously, they see you as somebody that they can trust. So be supportive. Understand that you shouldn't be judging their choices or decisions or reactions, because you just never know how you would respond if you were faced with the same exact situation. We might speculate how we would respond, but you just never know. And the last thing is to be patient and just listen to them. They don't necessarily need us to have answers or to say anything to them. Most times they just need somebody to listen to them. The next thing is to respond with positive words, things that will be helpful to them, so that they will look for additional help. Okay. Things like, I believe you. I'm so sorry that this happened to you. Would it be helpful if I stayed with you? Would you like me to take you to the hospital, or would you like me to go with you to file a report? Any of those things is all that they need. And the last thing is to respect their choice. Don't ask them why questions, because trust me on this, they've already asked themselves that 1,000 times already. Don't ask them, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you go, to the police right away? Why did you do this? Why didn't you do that? They've already done it. Not everyone's going to want to go to the police right away. Not everyone's going to want to go to the hospital right away. They may not be ready. But if you're supportive, if you're patient, if you listen, if you give them that space, hopefully by feeling that support, they will go. Most times victims will choose to go to a formal service provider like law enforcement or medical provider, if they feel that they're supported and they're believed. So that's what we need to do. And it's going to look different. You may not understand their process. You may not even understand their story. And that's all right, because trauma affects memory different than it does in our everyday lives. It is disjointed. It's not going to make sense. But our job is not to, it's not going to make sense to us. And that's not our job to make it make sense. So just recognize that their healing process is going to look different. And as long as you can be supportive for them, then that's what they're going to need. Things that you should never say to a victim of sexual assault or any crime for that matter is, I understand. Chances are you don't. Even if you've been a victim of a crime, chances are you don't necessarily understand, because remember, we all have our own experiences. We all have our own, I hate to say it, but baggage. We all come from a different place. We all have different experiences. And that affects the way we respond to things. Don't say things like, you're lucky that it was only, it could have been worse. It'll take some time, but you'll get over it. I can imagine how you feel. Or don't worry, it'll be all right. Those are things that don't help victims. They actually make them feel worse, or make them doubt that that their feelings are valid. They make them feel that they're overreacting potentially. Instead, say things like, I'm really sorry that this happened to you, or let them know that, it's not uncommon, that you're feeling this way, or, I can't even imagine how you feel. Things may never be the same, but they will get better. Those are statements that are more supportive. They are more positive thinking, and allow the victim to feel more supported. Things that are positive as far as accomplishments that we've made in the realm of victim services is that victims' rights have been expanded well beyond just written notification, which is all it used to be. Now we have more personal contact with them. We support them in different ways. We are contacting victims in between, not just notifying them when a court hearing's coming up. We're checking in on them to see how they're doing. Our division works very closely with victims and prosecutors. We make sure that their voices are heard. We are encouraging them to be involved and make sure that they are included, not just letting them know about the process, but we want them to know that how they want things, what they would like to see happen matters to us. We've helped in the development of the Victims' Rights Toolkit, and that helps victims exercise their rights. But it also is a toolkit that criminal justice professionals use. So attorneys and advocates use that, and you can find it at that website there, that ocvjc.org. We've also assisted, actually Crystal assisted in drafting the Marsy's Law language that implements the legislation that was passed. So she was driving down to Columbus for like a year straight, helping draft the language to make sure that not just that Marsy's Law was passed, but making sure that it was implemented in how it was actually being used in the courts. And obviously we provided our Start by Believing training to law enforcement, service providers across not just our community, but I've been giving the presentation across the state now to federal prosecutors, FBI agents, and other pretty big service providers. So that's a pretty big accomplishment. These are just some of the things that we provide to our victims, healing stones that our advocates make for victims to let them know that they're thought about. We know that they are strong and can get through this. And then on the other side, they will be able to heal through the end of it. These are just some resources that if you're interested in learning more about some of these agencies that work with victims, to learn more, I can make sure that Tanya gets these to you guys. This is where all of my information has come from. And then there's our contact information. So like Crystal said at the very beginning, she's the director of our Victim Services Division. And that's her contact information. And my contact information is there as well. So Tanya, if you want to go ahead and unmute everybody. I know we've got a lot of things in the chat there. My goodness. I hope we'll be able to.
Yes, I've gone through some of the legal questions and answered them. If I missed anything, anyone can feel free to speak up, but I am going to go through some of the chats right now. I have a list of some questions for you, Mickey. And feel free to put your cameras on, everybody. Actually, I need to do that too. I realized, I know when videos are playing, it's somebody had suggested to turn off our cameras, so we all did a good job of that. Okay, so somebody had said, I'm not sure if it was mentioned or not, but what is the ratio of men versus women who report sexual assault? And I think it was mentioned, but maybe if you could mention it again.
It was not mentioned as far as the ratio that are reported. As far as the percentages that we know are completed, 1 in 6 women are sexually assaulted in their lifetime, and 1 to 3% are sexually assaulted for men. Now, as far as reports are concerned, we know that fewer men report than women do. We do know that, but as far as the percentage is concerned, I don't know the exact percentage off the top of my head. I'm sure I can find it. I do know that there have been studies that tell us, but I do know that it's significantly lower than women. There are other populations, not just male versus female, but there are other populations that have obstacles that make reporting more difficult. For instance, the immigrant refugee population, those language barriers, cultural barriers, they present problems. They make it more difficult for victims to come forward and report. Transgender population, I didn't even get into this, but there are some populations that are at higher risk for being victims of sexual assault. Transgender population, believe it or not, 1 in 2, 50% of the transgender population will experience sexual assault. That's extremely high and absolutely unacceptable. 50%. Thank you for that. That's a really good question. I'll see if I can find that answer and get it to Tanya for you.
Thanks, Nikki.
Mhm.
And somebody had said, please, if possible, speak to the notion that if a male files a rape complaint against a female, people say he must be gay.
I've never heard that, but I do know that there's definitely backlash for men who report sexual assault where the female is the perpetrator. There's certainly derogatory statements, not necessarily that he must be gay. Of course, I'm not saying that that's not true, that that's being said. I've never heard that personally or seen that in research, but it's possible that that's said, but there definitely is derogatory statements against that reporter in that he's weak. You know, how could you report, man? Dude, you're getting, this woman's after you. It's horrible. A man is looked down upon when he's reporting being sexually assaulted by a female who more than likely is a female in power, or even a spouse or an intimate partner. But being sexually assaulted by a female as a male, as the victim, doesn't mean that you are not a victim. It absolutely is true. So yeah, you're 100% right, but it makes it that much harder. And our society refuses to believe that a man can be a victim. That just goes to show how much harder it is for a victim who's a man to come forward, or who identifies as a male to come forward and report it. Think about how difficult that would be.
And kind of along those lines, somebody had written, I do believe victims, but I'm curious about if someone is truthfully, falsely accused of a rape, sexual assault, or whatever, what is their best chance of a defense? I have some thoughts on this if you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to let you answer the legal stuff. I'm just going to give one one statistic, and that is that it's been found that only 2 to 8% of reports are false reports. So if a woman or a man comes forward and reports a sexual assault, only 2 to 8% are false. That's a very, very, very low percent. There's a lot of reasons why it's that low. And it's because, again, there's a huge stigma attached to sexual assault and reporting sexual assault. Nobody would ever put themselves through, the extensive ridicule and all the stuff that goes along with it if you're a true victim of it. But I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. It does, but it is very, very low. That being said, Tanya, I'll let you go ahead and speak to the legal aspect of it.
I mean, I think that's a great statistic because we don't see that very much in the court. I have seen it before.
It does happen.
Once in 15, almost 16 years of being a lawyer, I've seen it once. And And the burden, remember, for the prosecutors, the highest burden of our legal system. It is very hard to prove these cases, especially as Mickey said, victims are afraid to come forward. You know, as I talked about in our chat, physical evidence isn't always there because of how long it takes for victims to, you know, muster up the guts to, I don't want to even say muster up the guts, but the desire to actually report if they so choose to report. Not all of them do. So it's a very hard process, as Mickey said. So just getting victims to report makes it even harder on us to prosecute. So you don't, you know, number one, you have a minimal amount of individuals compared to what could be reporting. And then when they do, there's such a high burden with such little evidence that we have. So it makes it really hard for prosecutors to prosecute somebody successfully on these cases. That being said, in the almost 16 years I've been practicing, I did see one case where they were able, the prosecutors themselves found out that it was a false claim made by an individual, and the judge, shockingly, because I don't know that every judge would do this, sentenced the person who made the false claim to the same amount of time that the other person would have faced had they been found guilty of the sexual assault.
Wow.
So yeah, so I remember being in the room when I was earlier, a younger attorney, like shocked by it all, because you don't see that very much. I think to answer your question, Nathan, I think Mickey and I will both agree that it happens so little.
It's rare.
It's very rare, very, very
I did forget to, well, I didn't forget, but because we were in such a time crunch, I did not speak to, as far as evidence is concerned in sexual assault cases, there is almost always little evidence. Okay, we don't always have a ton of evidence, and that's what a lot of people do not understand. In rape cases, there may be some evidence, but there is not overwhelming evidence. When a victim goes to the hospital to have a rape kit done or a sexual assault forensic examination done, and that's what it's called now, it is a very extensive, intrusive examination. It is like 2 to 3 hours long. It's from head to toe. They examine every part of the body with cameras, microscopes. They, take hair samples. They take close-up pictures of everything. They examine every part of the body. It's very intrusive. And there are many times, and I've read hundreds of sexual assault reports done by the forensic nurse, where they'll show, they'll mark, they have a body diagram, and it'll say unremarkable, unremarkable. And that's their way of saying no injuries, no injuries. So it's not that there are injuries to these victims. That does not mean that an assault did not occur, right? It's just that, these parts of our body were meant to be pliable. And that's the way that these nurses explain it. Women were meant to give childbirth, right? We were meant to have children. They are meant to be pliable. So they are meant to take quite a bit of, I'm not even sure what the word is I'm looking for, but you understand what I'm getting at. So there's not always this evidence that you would see like in a homicide, or even an assault, like a regular assault, like a physical assault. This is very different. So there's not always that evidence like what you would expect to see on TV. It's not the same. So just because people say, well, where's the evidence? There's no evidence, then there must not have been an assault. It's not the case. It's very different. So go ahead, Tanya. What's the next question?
There's a bunch of statements, Mickey, that you should read in there. Of course, they love the video at the end. They were commenting, thank you so much for a great presentation. Make sure you take a look at it before we end, and there'll be some time for you to do that, because I won't log us off right away. But there was a comment that said, I worked in ER many years ago, and this brought to mind one incident. And I think it was at the time you were showing the slides of the hypotheticals with the implicit bias. this brought to mind one incident of a 40-ish-year-old lady came in who was raped, assaulted, and the discussion among us in the medical field who were working that evening was, who would rape a 40-ish-year-old girl?
Yeah.
So there you go. And that, I just thought I would share that comment because it, kind of goes right along with what you,
Right.
what
It
you-
ties into some of the thinking that our society has, that's the way that we've been thinking, who would do that to that person,
Yep. As a 40-ish-year-old girl.
Right, as almost 50.
I know, right? But that, that was the other comment. I didn't catch any other questions that we didn't answer in
I
the
just saw one that
chat.
popped up.
Oh, there was one about children's services, but we are going to get into this in another week. So I told Catherine that let's save that for next week when we have everybody from juvenile court.
Grace just asked one. Can you
Oh,
talk
maybe
more
she's
about-
sending it to you because I don't. Oh wait, I do see it. No, to everyone. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you talk more about rape kits that are untested? What is the local situation with rape kits?
Great.
The good question. That is, that's part of the Asaki specialized unit that I work on. So Akron applied for a grant through the Department of Justice. I'm sorry, when I say Akron, I mean the Akron Police Department. I should be more specific. Akron Police Department applied for, this was several years ago, applied for a grant through the Department of Justice to test all of their untested rape kits. They've been sitting in evidence locker for too many years. We had several kits. Well, so when I say several, I mean thousands of kits that had been sitting for 20 plus years. Almost all of them have been tested now, thanks to the funding and this specialized unit. We have 3 dedicated investigators, 1.5 prosecutors, myself. We have community advocates. We have a specialized trauma therapist. We have BCI on our side, and we also have some crime analysts, some data analysts from Case Western Reserve that are helping us kind of analyze everything that we've gathered from all of these old cases. We are working through all of them. The Prentice Smith case that I referenced earlier came from this project. We are getting down to the end of this, so we are almost through all of it. We do have a group of kits that hit to DNA. So there are DNA hits, but we do not have, they didn't hit to a specific person. So they hit to someone, but we don't know who they are. So they are going to be sent out for genealogical testing, which is, we were just granted additional funding for that specific testing. And that's a whole nother round of stuff that we'll have to go through. We've got a lab that's working specifically on that. And once they are able to go through their tree that they go through, they will narrow it down. And then we have to do additional legwork to investigative work to figure out if we can find these people. So hopefully we'll be able to quote unquote clear the shelves very soon, probably within the next couple of years. All of ours will be cleared. So we're in a good place. And the Akron Police Department has done a lot of really, really hard work. Unfortunately, because of the amount of time that it took for us to get through all of this. And there are a lot of reasons why those kits stayed on the shelves and were not tested. Many of the victims that we have recontacted either did not want to go forward with the investigation. They were upset because it took so long for us to come forward and say, we believe you, because, before nobody believed them.
or they felt like now you want to come forward. It's been 20 years or it's been 15 years and now you want to do something. They're upset about that, and I can't blame them, but we wanted to at least let them know that, we did try to do what we could. Others are grateful and they want to move forward. They want to see justice. They want to have their voice heard. And we're taking those all the way across the finish line as best we can. So we do have, I believe there are 11 open cases right now that are currently open in the court system, that are either going through hearings and are scheduled for trials. So those will be coming through soon. So that's where we are.
Thank you for your hard work on that, Mickey. I know you've done a lot with the Saki grant, and you guys have gone through a lot of cases, made a lot of
lot. Yeah.
Mickey, do you see any other questions? I don't see any other. Does anybody have any questions they could unmute too?
I don't know, but if anybody has questions that they think of either after we're all done today, you can always either email Tanya or you can email me, and I'll be happy to respond to any of those. I really appreciate your patience with us tonight. I'm sorry that we ran over. This is usually victim services night is one of the harder ones, because sometimes we have people in our Citizens Academy who either know someone who's been a victim or either may have been a victim at some point in their life. So it can be hard, but just know that the work that we do, we try to do our best. We try to do right by our victims, and we work hard to improve it as much as possible. So we thank you for your time and your patience with us tonight. Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you, Mickey. Any other questions for Mickey before we log off?
Thank you, Catherine. That was very sweet of you to say. I appreciate that. She said it didn't seem like we went over. It seemed like it went fast.
Oh, that is nice. There's a bunch of nice.
At least I wasn't boring, I guess.
You're never boring, Mickey. You do a great job. There's a lot of, great presentations, comments that you should read through. I'll keep us on the line. But if everybody wants to log off, go ahead. I'm gonna just hang in there a little bit for Mickey to read your encouragement. We appreciate your thoughts. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.